The next generation GPUs from Nvidia have had a problem. Pricing, or rather, the pricing of one card in particular. This fella, the RTX 3080, a GPU that delivered excellent price versus performance and remains an excellent product to this very day. Its successor, RTX 4080, launched with a 72% increase in price and a performance bump nowhere near in line with that, which is obviously problematic. The new RTX 4070 Ti goes some way to addressing this, but still hammers home the point that extra performance and big price reductions are unfortunately things of the past. That said, this renamed RTX 4080 12GB is a fine product overall. With a confirmed MSRP of $799, 100 up on RTX 3080, you are getting value from that extra money. Performance of the card is typically in 3090 to 3090 Ti territory. You're getting an extra 2 gigs of frame buffer memory. On top of that, there's DLSS 3, which hasn't yet established itself as the game changer that DLSS 2 was, but on the flip side, we're finding that it's becoming much more useful in certain titles, The Witcher 3 for example. However, that $799 MSRP, down from the $899 of the unlaunched 4080 12GB, is reliant on third-party partner designs arriving at Nvidia's suggested price point, because unfortunately this time around there are no Founders Edition cards, which is a bit of a disappointment. Third-party cards seem to be dominated by massive designs, and that extends to the Gigabyte OC model we were sent for review from Nvidia. For a card that offers 50 to 55% of the 4090's performance under extreme RT workloads, the product we have here is significantly larger than the flagship's already massive design. Compare and contrast with the RTX 3070 Ti Founders, which has a similar power requirement and is a much smaller card. I mean, there's no reason why the 4070 Ti shouldn't be looking something like this. Now you may be wondering what the OC element of the Gigabyte model adds to the equation, but it turns out to be a mere plus 30 MHz to the boost clock, insignificant for a product that routinely runs at around 2.8 GHz. As it is, there are few surprises with the card outside of this gigantic form factor. There's the standard arrangement of 3 DisplayPort 1.48 outputs alongside HDMI 2.1. A perfectly adequate lineup, while power is delivered by the same socket used on 4080 and 4090. The difference here is that as the power requirement is much lower, only 2 8-pin PCIe cables are required, attached to the GPU via a 2-socket dongle. While realizing that a new power connector is going to be required at some point, I'd have preferred standard PCIe power inputs for a card of this level, simply to make upgrades simpler. Let's kick off by talking about power efficiency, because while there's been a lot of controversy around Nvidia's latest GPU lineup, consumption, or rather the performance you get from the power drawn, has been pretty impressive across the board. To put this to the test with the RTX 4070 Ti, I repeated the same game and power benchmarks I used in the AMD RX 7900 XTX and XT reviews, but adding in the new card and the RTX 3080. In Control and Dying Light 2 running in RT modes and using Forza Horizon 5 and Hitman 3 for rasterization, we measure performance and we measure power consumption. By dividing watts by frame rate, we can calculate joules per frame, and the lower that is, the better. First impressions, well, interestingly enough, I found that while still very efficient, RTX 4080 is actually a step ahead of the 4070 Ti, and I didn't quite expect that. Control is an interesting case in that it's a bit of a banana skin game that has scalability issues on the Ada Lovelace architecture. The faster the card, the more performance relatively you get, more than you'd expect. Even so, the new offering has higher performance than RTX 3080 and a 25% power per frame reduction. But interestingly, 4080 has a 10% advantage over the 4070 Ti judged by the same metrics. RTX 4080 is always more efficient in all of our tests. In Dying Light 2 with full RT enabled, the 4070 Ti offers up a 29% per frame power reduction up against 3080. However, the 4080 once again has a circa 10% power per frame advantage over the new card. In both of these RT tests, the RX 7900 XT is more comparable with Nvidia's last-gen architecture, which is perhaps to be expected, bearing in mind how AMD has effectively delivered RT performance in line with older last-gen GeForce cards. Looking at our rasterization tests, Forza Horizon 5 continues to fascinate by using power that's nowhere near the TGP limits of the Ada Lovelace cards, producing fantastic efficiency. Yes, RTX 4080 still has that circa 10% point lead over 4070 Ti, but the new card slashes the power per frame requirement by 46% against RTX 3080. 4070 Ti only requires 67% of the power to generate a frame up against RX 7900 XT, which is perhaps to be expected as rather weirdly, Forza Horizon 5 isn't especially performant on the RDNA 3 architecture. Something that's certainly not the case with Hitman 3, where RDNA 3 is blazingly fast, delivering its only win against the 4070 Ti in these power tests. Nvidia's latest requires 12% more power per frame, but both of the latest offerings don't touch the RTX 4080. Even so, RTX 4070 Ti still has a 31% power per frame reduction compared to RTX 3080. So power efficiency tested and out of the way, it's time to power on straight into our benchmarks, and as is the norm in our new test suite, we're kicking off with ray tracing performance in some of gaming's most punishing workloads. As always, we're testing on a modern platform based on an Intel Core i9-12900K, 32 gigs of DDR5 running at 6,000 megatransfers per second, as provided by our friends at G-Skill, while our motherboard of choice is the Asus ROG Z690 Maximus Hero. And yeah, of course, resizable bar, rebar, is enabled for all cards. Let the avalanche of data commence with Cyberpunk 2077 in its ultra-high RT mode. The full Monty short of the Psycho ray tracing setting. Still a pretty hefty workout that brings RTX 3080 and all legacy RDNA 2 AMD cards to their knees in 4K mode. With a 41 percentage point lead over RTX 3080, what you're actually seeing here is the value of 12 gigabytes of memory up against the 10 gigs of the last gen Ampere favourite, on top of the compute advantage offered up by the new Ada Lovelace architecture. Up against its nearest current gen AMD counterpart, 7900 XT, there's a commanding 30% lead here for the new Nvidia card, with a 2.1 times performance multiplier against the old 6900 XT. Stacking up the new 4070 Ti against its RTX 4000 series brethren and RTX 3090 Ti, 4090 is almost 80 percentage points to the better, with the 4080's lead dropping to around 28%. Against RTX 3090 Ti, we start to find the closest performance equivalent from the last generation. Yeah, that monstrous 3090 Ti is only 4 percentage points faster than the much more efficient 4070 Ti. I'd say this is a strong start for the 4070 Ti. We've got clear water versus 3080, while 3090 Ti performance for $799 looks impressive. This isn't the only time that the 4070 Ti mixes it up with Nvidia's last-gen flagship, but this is certainly one of the more positive results. With Techland's Dying Light 2, we're seeing similar results to our prior look at Cyberpunk 2077, with one exception. This time, 3080's 10 gigs of frame buffer memory is not a limiting factor for the game, so 4070 Ti's performance advantage over 3080 drops to a more realistic 22%. AMD's latest fares a little better here, with the 7900 XT delivering around 89% of the 4070 Ti's RT performance, though you'll need to move up to the $1,000 XTX model to see AMD hardware actually pull slightly ahead of 4070 Ti. In terms of how RTX 4070 Ti scales against its RTX 4000 counterparts, there are a few surprises here. The much maligned 4080 is 28 percentage points to the better, though it'll cost you 50% more based on MSRPs, while the flagship 4090 powers ahead with a performance lead in excess of 80%. Once again, 3090 Ti is the natural comparison point with last-gen Nvidia cards. The 4070 Ti is a touch slower, around 5 to 6 points off the pace, So it sits in a kind of middle ground between 3090 to 3090 Ti, which I think is still pretty impressive. Next up, let's take a look at Codemasters F122 with the full ray tracing suite enabled on ultra settings. Ray tracing performance continues to favour the 4070 Ti up against last gen 3080. You're getting around 20% more performance for around 14% more money. This is a title where we found the RDNA 3 offerings from AMD to run rather well, with the 4070 Ti only mustering an 8 percentage point performance lead over 7900 XT. It's hardly the norm, but the 7900 XTX came in consistently faster in our tests, though of course both RDNA cards are notionally more expensive based on MSRPs. There are no real surprises in terms of scalability against other Nvidia cards. The lack of value found in 4080 is demonstrable, with a mere 25 percentage point lead in a world where its MSRP at the time of recording at least is 50% higher. Surely something's got to shift there. Once again, RTX 4070 Ti slots in between 3090 and 3090 Ti. Last gen flagship is almost 7 points ahead of the newcomer, which in turn has a 4 percentage point lead over the RTX 3090. Thus far, the emerging narrative is that the RTX 4070 Ti offers performance somewhere between 3090 and 3090 Ti, but it's important to bear in mind that the Ada Lovelace architecture is all new and different games tax different architectures in different ways. We noted some pretty poor scalability in control between 4080 and 4090, and unfortunately 4070 Ti falls a little short too. Had to run this one a couple of times to be sure, but it's definitely the case that the new card only offers an 8 to 9 percentage point lead over the venerable RTX 3080. But even so, we're still seeing a decent enough 10 percentage point lead over RX 7900 XT. So again, you'd need to opt for the more expensive RDNA 3 card to beat it. But even then, there's no FSR2 support, so playable frame rates with RT are a clear Nvidia advantage with this one. Stacking up the new card against other RTX 4000 products and RTX 3090 Ti, you can see the issue here. The last gen card is almost 19% faster overall, which deviates from the narrative we've established so far. 4080 around 29 points to the better, still not good enough for the price being demanded of it, but the RTX 4090 is 91% faster. In this case, 4090 almost offers the same kind of price-performance ratio, amazingly enough, as 4070 Ti. This is an outlier result, but not the only time we'll see RTX 4070 Ti fall a little short. After the hiccup we had with Control, 4070 Ti is back on track with Hitman 3, here tested with all of its ray tracing features enabled, RT shadows and reflections. Seeing a convincing lead for the 4070 Ti over the older 3080 here to the tune of 23%, higher than the MSRP differential between the two products. Meanwhile, it's back to business as usual with RDNA 3 comparisons as well. RX 7900 XT has around 90% of the 4070 Ti's performance in this title, but its lowest 1% scores are considerably worse. Switching things up to look at the Ada Lovelace comparisons, things look relatively predictable here. A 23-point lead for the RTX 4080, further cementing the lack of value in its launch MSRP, while the 4090 is once again in another class entirely with a 73 percentage point lead. We're also seeing 4070 Ti return to its position as a product that's almost as fast as RTX 3090 Ti, and that's remarkable, bearing in mind the massive power requirements of the old Ti, not to mention that its memory bus is twice as wide. Let's move on to Metro Exodus Enhanced Edition. The revised 4A engine is built around ray tracing as a foundational concept for its stunning real-time global illumination system. While built to run well on AMD's RDNA 2 architecture, principally for the current gen consoles, the game is super fast on Nvidia kits, to the point where there's a huge 25 percentage point lead for the 4070 Ti over the 7900 XT, and it even beats XTX on this one. For many, the RTX 3080 is the litmus test for the new card, and while the circa 19 percentage point lead is sizable, it's not quite as high a boost as other titles we've seen. Creditable nonetheless. Correspondingly, when we stack up 4070 Ti against 3090 Ti, the older card is some way ahead with a 9-point lead. The RTX 4070 Ti still sneaks ahead of the 3090 though, so it's hardly a slouch. Performance differentials up against the other Ada Lovelace cards come in as expected. A circa 27-point lead there for RTX 4080, rising to a huge 72% for the 4090. So we've spent a lot of time looking at Marvel's Spider-Man Remastered on PC, and while city swinging can cause performance challenges, this scene from Feast HQ is actually very heavy on the GPU, but not quite as taxing on CPU as those outdoor scenes, making it a good test for graphics hardware. Coming in with a 34 percentage point lead over RTX 3080, Spider-Man cements itself as a title that's super heavy on VRAM at high resolutions with RT at maximum settings, meaning that the 10 gigs in the old Ampere card isn't quite enough. The game is also relatively friendly to AMD hardware, meaning that RDNA puts up a pretty good fight against Nvidia here. 7900 XT edges ahead here by 3 percentage points in this test. Comparing the 4070 Ti to the other Nvidia juggernauts, we return to a situation where the 3090 Ti is still faster, but to such a small degree that you'd never really be able to tell in the run of play. Scalability moving up the stack sees poorer returns for the faster Ada Lovelace cards, circa 22-point and 61-point lead for 4080 and 4090 respectively. You can expect that there is some CPU limitations at play there. Let's move on to RT Performance with image reconstruction in play. DLSS versus FSR2, where AMD hardware is factored in. Just want to point out here that this isn't an image quality comparison, it's an analysis of performance when upscaling from similar base resolutions. For the record, DLSS generally offers superior quality, especially at resolutions lower than 4K, and it supports more titles. Still, let's dig in. Cyberpunk 2077, CDPR's Epic, received FSR2 support in its recent 1.61 update, making it an excellent candidate for inclusion in our Reconstruction lineup. Ultra RT settings in this game at native resolutions, especially 4K, deliver highly depressed performance, so DLSS and FSR2 are definitely the way to go if you're looking to enjoy RT features on this one. Lower base resolutions resolve many of the RT bottlenecks this game has, even on a card as mighty as RTX 4090. Looking at 4070 Ti, there's still a sizable and an impressive 25 percentage point lead for the new card over the RTX 3080, again likely down to its more limited memory pool in addition to the extra compute on the new card. It also retains a sizable lead over RDNA 3, outpacing 7900 XT by almost 22%, while also handily beating 7900 XTX, not plotted here. Performance differentials against higher-end RTX 4000 models are depressed a little, par for the course with lower base resolutions, but once again it's the comparison with the highest-end Ampere cards that holds some interest. Again, we're extremely close to RTX 3090 Ti performance, to the point where 4070 Ti delivers 98% of the older flagship's throughput. Looking at Dying Light 2 with full RT settings and image reconstruction in play, you may remember from our RDNA 3 review that 7900 XT and XTX performed fairly well here, though its frame rate averages are skewed up a touch by content in the test sequence that has a lot of the skybox in view. So check this out. 4070 Ti has a lead against 7900 XT, but that lead vanishes when we look at the sky, before returning again as the ground returns to dominate the view. Even so, once again, 4070 Ti pulls ahead of 7900 XT by around 10% on average, and the XTX only holds a marginal advantage over the new Nvidia card, while costing a fair bit more. Similar to Cyberpunk 2077, performance differentials against the other Ada Lovelace cards are compressed a little thanks to image reconstruction working from a lower base resolution. 4080 is around 22% faster, while 4090 manages a 64-point lead. In this test, we found the 4070 Ti to pull slightly ahead of 3090 Ti, but it's very, very close to margin of error. Looking at Marvel's Spider-Man with 4070 Ti, the upscaled DLSS rendition of this scene yields a 16% increase over 3080, though interestingly, this is where we see RX 7900 XT pull ahead A rare sight in an RT title, and yeah, pretty much as we saw without image reconstruction in place. Looking at the Nvidia heavy hitters, 4070 Ti isn't quite as stable in terms of frame rates as the 3090 Ti, but it does manage to match its average performance level. We're hitting CPU limits on this one, which is where DLSS 3 comes in. However, without frame generation active, 4080 only has a 17-point lead, rising to just short of 30% with a 4090. We'd expect these differentials to space out if a higher DLSS quality level were used. All of the Ada Lovelace cards can support 4K 60 minimum, even on DLSS quality mode. Completing our benchmarks is a look at Rasterisation Performance, where we see some interesting 4070 Ti results, similar to the variations we saw with ray tracing, but with a couple more gotchas for the new card when it's compared against the last gen GA102 chip juggernauts. So to benchmark control outside of RT, we actually move back to the game's opening moments, an easily repeatable scene that'll have to do bearing in mind the lack of a bespoke benchmark, or indeed easily accessible cutscenes. Now this is a title that struggled to outperform 3080 in ray tracing, and the situation doesn't improve much without RT, even in a different area of the game no less. The performance differential against RTX 3080 wasn't great in the Corridor of Doom, and it only improves a touch outside of it here as we log a mere 11% boost to performance. Control isn't any kinder to AMD hardware either, and here RX 7900 XT only pushes ahead by around 8 percentage points when we would consider rasterization to be that card's strongest suit. Looking at the new card in relation to the other RTX 4000 offerings, it's interesting to note that the 4090 is 28% faster than the 4080, which is in turn 29% ahead of the 4070 Ti. We've been looking at the RTX 3090 Ti as the natural last-gen comparison point, but here it has a big 15 percentage point advantage. The 4070 Ti is actually more in line with 3080 Ti performance in this one. We continue our Cyberpunk 2077 benchmarking with this developer streaming test, which sees the game effectively run itself around a circuit of Night City before returning control to the player. Here we're on ultra settings with Reconstruction and RT disabled. 4K is still highly challenging here, and it's a scenario similar to Control where the 4070 Ti falls short of expectations. It's delivering another slightly disappointing 10% uplift in performance against the 3080, while the 7900 XT delivers a commanding 25 percentage point lead over Nvidia's latest. Looking at the Nvidia Ada Lovelace stack, 4080 around 30% faster, though 4090 is off-paced with a mere 60 percentage point lead. We've continued to use the 3090 Ti here as our main comparison point for last-gen Nvidia, and the fact is it's circa 19% better than the new card. In actual fact, the 4070 Ti fails to match even 3080 Ti, let alone 3090. Stripping out the RT features from F122 but retaining everything else at ultra settings sees the rasterization situation for the 4070 Ti shift back towards the more underwhelming results we've seen so far, with a mere 11 percentage point uplift for the new card up against RTX 3080, and this in turn allows AMD's closest competitor, 7900 XT, to deliver a 21 percentage point advantage. Even the older 6900 XT is still in the mix here, offering up around 93% of the RTX 4070 Ti's performance. The non-RT rendition of F122 is another title that sees 4090 most likely hit by CPU limitations, as it only seems to deliver around 17% more performance than 4080. Even so, the overly expensive 80 class product still manages a 28 percentage point lead over 4070 Ti, so we're clearly back in GPU bound territory in the lower power classes. Once again, 4070 Ti can't match the 3090 Ti, which is around 12 percentage points to the better. The new Nvidia card sits at a kind of midpoint between 3080 Ti and 3090 performance on this one. So thus far, the 4070 Ti has managed to power ahead of the 3080 to varying degrees, but there have been some scenarios, especially in rasterization, where the gains haven't been entirely convincing. that doesn't describe the situation in Hitman 3, where the narrative we set up earlier in this review continues, as the 4070 Ti offers up a big 25 percentage point advantage over the 3080. Glacier engine here seems to thrive on the latest GPUs, but that extends to good AMD performance as well, great AMD performance. This title loves RDNA 3, so the 7900 XT is once again a good 23 to 24 points ahead of Nvidia's latest. Looking at how 4070 Ti sits within the Ada Lovelace stack so far, 4080 is only 17 to 18% ahead, while the 4090 is a good 71 percentage points clear. And the resurgence in the 4070 Ti's fortunes continues as we look at Playground Games' excellent Forza Horizon 5, where there's another good-sized improvement for the 4070 Ti over the classic 3080. You're looking at a 21 percentage point advantage for a card that costs 14% more, which isn't bad in the current economic climate, and its fortunes are also boosted by the fact that RDNA 3 bizarrely underperforms on this one. 7900 XT does retain a lead over 4070 Ti, but it's only 7 percentage points, which isn't exactly game-changing, bearing in mind it's a more expensive card. When we stack up 4070 Ti against other RTX 4000 cards, it's definitely a sweet spot in terms of price versus performance on this one. 4080 is only circa 22% faster, while even the 4090, which is almost certainly CPU limited, is only 51 percentage points to the better. This game is another one that favours the Ada Lovelace architecture, as the 4070 Ti even manages to beat RTX 3090 Ti by a couple of points here. The run of good results we've seen with 4070 Ti comes to an end as we look at Red Dead Redemption 2, which has caused some scalability problems for both AMD and Nvidia in prior reviews. Unfortunately, this one is another game where the 4070 Ti can't deliver a double-digit lead over RTX 3080, just over 9% to the better in our testing. This game caused problems for AMD too, especially in how poorly 7900 XT compared to the 7900 XTX, but even so, AMD's somewhat unappealing $900 card still squeaks out a 9 to 10 percentage point lead over RTX 4070 Ti. There's clear water between RTX 4070 Ti, 4080 and 4090 though, but it does look like once again 4070 Ti sits in the price versus performance sweet spot judged by its counterparts. Based on launch MSRPs, 4080 costs 50% more but delivers just 24% more performance, while the 4090's MSRP is literally double but offers up only 62% more performance overall. Compared against Nvidia's last-gen juggernaut, RTX 3090 Ti is around 10% faster than 4070 Ti, while even the 3090 inches ahead with a 2-point lead over the new offering. Our results close out with a look at Shadow the Tomb Raider, which does have a tendency to throw up some interesting results, and this one no exception. 4070 Ti does what it needs to do here against the 3080 with a 17 percentage point lead, which also puts it in an interesting place against the competing RDNA 3 offerings. 7900 XT only delivers a 5 percentage point lead in this game. There's healthy scalability across the RTX 4000 line as a whole, as we compare 4070 Ti to 4080 and 4090, with the higher end offerings delivering a 29% and an 80% lead respectively. Once again, 4070 Ti is kind of sitting in that price versus performance sweet spot judged against its counterparts, though we should expect that, bearing in mind how expensive the other Ada Lovelace cards are. Looking at the RTX 3090 Ti, it has a reasonable lead over the new offering at circa 8%, meaning that 4070 Ti is narrowly pushing ahead of the RTX 3090 in this one. Let's try to wrap everything up then, and this is a difficult one to sum up. The pricing of the new generation of PC graphics hardware is a big concern for users, and based on evidence like the recent Gamers Nexus report on the RTX 4080 problem, seems like Nvidia's dominance in the higher end of the graphics space is down to two products. On the one side, we have the brilliant RTX 4090. Then on the other side, we have the price versus performance win delivered by the last gen 3080. The arrival of the 4070 Ti is an interesting answer to that though, and it can be interpreted in two ways. First of all, If you're expecting the same kind of gen-on-gen improvements to performance alongside a significant price cut at the same time, you're likely to be disappointed by RTX 4070 Ti. It's more expensive than RTX 3080, and it delivers broadly comparable performance to the last gen 3090, 3090 Ti, as opposed to comprehensively besting them in the same way that 3080 trounced the 2080 Ti. Second way of looking at pricing is to accept that we are living in economically challenging times. Inflation is rampant, while the cost of energy has significantly increased, meaning that the price of making just about anything has risen. Meanwhile, the cost of semiconductors on the most cutting-edge process nodes has gone up. Producing smaller, denser chips is challenging and costs a whole bunch more. And it's the reason why Microsoft created Xbox Series S. When we sat down to talk with the architect of the Xbox Series consoles and why they made the Series S, the answer was that they saw no way to produce a cost-reduced slim version of the higher-end Series X, as cost per transistor on the main chip there remains static with the newer process nodes. Their solution was to cut down on costs instead by producing a lower-end console, and this has been borne out years later as prices on console hardware are only heading in one direction, up. So of course the same thing is happening with graphics. So yeah, at some point we've got to accept that these things are going to cost more money, but the sums still don't add up for the RTX 4080 based on its launch MSRP. But looking at the 4070 Ti, a $799 price point seems more reasonable. There's a 24% increase in transistor count over the GA102 used in the last gen flagships. Performance advantages may vary against RTX 3080, but generally it's a decent enough increase. On top of that, you're getting 2 extra gigs of memory. Plus there's improved power efficiency, and you're getting features like DLSS 3 and a vastly improved media engine. If the market has been buying 4090 and 3080, well, now I'd say there are good reasons to favour the 4070 Ti over that 3080. So judged by the economics of the here and now alongside the realities of using the latest process nodes, I don't have a problem with the pricing of the 4070 Ti, assuming it does arrive at $799. RTX 3080 isn't going anywhere if you prefer one of those, plus there's always the used market for cut price alternatives. The 4070 Ti effectively replaces the 3080 in my view, and yeah, it costs more, but it also delivers more, proportionately more. It's not likely to be a contender for those who've already bought a last gen card, but that's really the audience for a brand new GPU anyway. If you're looking for a replacement to a Pascal or Turing card, the 4070 Ti wipes the floor with the closest priced equivalents of the time. One final thing about 4070 Ti, we talk about these cards in relation to one another, but looking at console performance in like-for-like environments, we're seeing some really big performance multipliers at this point. Even without factoring in RT, as we're seeing here in A Plague Tale Requiem, running in PS5's 40 FPS mode in an area that can't hit 40 FPS, we can compare unlocked performance, effectively, to 4070 Ti running the exact same settings, the exact same 1440p to 2160p upscaling. And yeah, 4070 Ti is delivering a 2.1 times performance multiplier, rising to 2.7 times with DLSS 3 frame generation. Swap out Asobo's upscaler for the higher quality DLSS quality mode, that drops to 2.6 times, but that's still really impressive. PC hardware truly is powering so far ahead of the consoles now. I'm going to leave you with this one. It's Forza Horizon 5. So Xbox Series X has a quality mode that runs at 30 frames per second. We can actually exceed those settings with PC's Extreme. We can use DLAA for improved image quality, and we're still well north at 60 frames per second, and we can boost performance still further by using other DLSS alternatives, although there is a quality hit there. Point is, at these price points, PC is delivering a whole lot more than the consoles, which don't look to be dropping in price anytime soon. So I'm going to be interested to see 4070 and 4060 price versus performance. So 4070 Ti takes its place alongside the last gen powerhouses, and while this class of card may no longer be the best of the best, they're still capable of amazing results. And that's my review, and I hope you enjoyed it. So yeah, please do like, subscribe, share, ring the bell for those notionally instant notifications. No guarantees there, but I do guarantee you that the DF Supporter program is pretty awesome. So yeah, please join for bonus material, high quality video downloads, early access, a ton of awesome retro stuff happening on the retro tier. It's all good stuff. Ah yes, and of course our brilliant community. So that's all from me for this video. Thanks for making it all the way to the end of it, if indeed you did. And generally, thanks for watching and supporting Digital Foundry.